Bonsoir à vous tous ventus descend. Bonsoir à vous tous ventus descend. I've been practicing that. For those of you who don't speak French, that means good evening to all of you bloodsuckers. Before we begin, just a few castle-keeping requests. Please silence your cell phones, refrain from taking flash photography, and turn off the video on your cameras, please. My name is Andy Cahan, Director of Author Events, and I'm very excited to welcome back our guest. This evening we have a very special treat in store because our interview with the author will be with Victoria Wilson, Anne Rice's editor of nearly 40 years, and the author in her own right of a terrific and much praised biography of Barbara Stanwyck. Curiously, or perhaps not, if you read the dedication page of Prince Lestat, you'll notice that the last name in the list is that of John Bon Jovi. But we all know who's the rock star in the room tonight. Please welcome Anne Rice and Victoria Wilson.
Hello, everybody, and thank you all for coming on this, I think, glorious night and a perfect night to have this interview. With everything being so foggy and overcast, I thought, my God, it's beautiful. Perfect moon for tonight. Anyway, this is a great treat for us to be in Philadelphia and a great treat for me to be interviewing my wonderful Anne Rice. Long history. And so, let me start at this question, and that is that Lestat, he's a hero, a monster, a tragic hero who hasn't conquered his instincts and acts impulsively, a vampire to the core. He's a symbol of freedom and dominance. How did Lestat come to you initially?
You know, Lestat was one of those characters that just developed out of the corner of my eye. I was paying no attention to that character at all. I was writing my first novel, Interview with the Vampire, and I identified completely with Louie, the vampire who's giving the interview, telling the story of how he became an immortal. And Lestat was the vampire who gave him the dark gift or the blood. And really, I can't explain how little thought I gave to Lestat. I mean, I guess I loved the character of Lestat, and I loved the way he worked, and I loved his vigor, and it never really occurred to me that anyone would see him as the strong character in the novel. And I remember when you wrote to me, and Vicki is the editor who accepted my first novel for publication. She's the editor who changed my life. And, you know, she, while I was still reeling from the shock of knowing that my novel was going to be published and that everything was going to work out the way I'd always dreamed, or I at least would have my chance for that, I got this wonderful letter from Vicki, and I remember you said in the letter, Lestat is the vampire that every little vampire boy or girl dreams of growing up to be. And I thought, well, I guess that's true. He really has a very good time, doesn't he? But he really did take on a life of his own, as the cliche goes. And I knew when I finished the book that I wanted to someday do the story from his point of view. I didn't think in terms of a series, and it was 8 years before I did write The Vampire Lestat. And I had a lot of difficulty getting with Lestat and getting his voice right for that book. But when it happened, it really happened big time for me. And he became the hero of all the Vampire Chronicles thereafter, really.
And do you remember that moment that, well, it wasn't a moment, it was a long time, really, that progression where it finally, it caught you and you said, this is something that I have to do?
Yeah, it took a really long time. I don't remember exactly why or when. I remember a lot of people were very much against it. They said, don't write a follow-up to that book. You won't be able to do it. They were very pessimistic about it, and I felt like I had to do it and I was going to do it. And of course, what I did is something I've continued to do all through my career. I wrote something radically different from the first book. It was a different voice, different tone, different organization, different structure, everything.
And of course, that's good.
Well, you would think so, but I've always had people who were disappointed that one book did not resemble the book before it, or did not click with the book that's their favorite book. You know, that's a common response to any of the chronicles that I write. It's happening right now with Prince Lestat. You can see it with the reviews coming in. There are people saying this is just not like the ones I particularly liked. Others saying, oh yeah, this is it, absolutely, this is just what I wanted. But it's a polarized response. Yeah.
Well, as I say, I think it's great that over your entire career that you've been writing books that are different from the previous book, and that every book has its own universe, its own rules, its own feeling, and of course, your writing has changed over the years, so it would be, I would bet, impossible for you to write as you had when you wrote that book, when you wrote that first book.
Absolutely. I wouldn't want to do it.
Exactly.
I would want to write what I want to write now, you know? That's what's exciting to me. But you're bringing up something I think that's very important to my life, and that's that you have always asked only one thing of me, and that is that I write the book I want to write and do the best job I can do with it. And people are amazed when I tell them that my editor actually has that attitude. Last night we were doing a stage event and somebody asked me, they said, what if your editor doesn't like what you're doing or tells you to do something you don't want to do? How do you respond? And I said, my editor would never tell me to do something.
Never happened.
No,
Never
I mean it just wouldn't happen in the universe that we share. And I think that unfortunately there are many writers out there who don't have a relationship like that, the kind of relationship that we've had for 40 years. They don't have it. And some young writers in particular who are just starting out, they're very afraid of what that relationship is going to be like. And they do see the editor as an authority figure who may want them to do things that they don't want to do. And certainly I've heard stories from authors like that. But anyway, that doesn't happen with you and me.
Well, I can understand how they would be afraid, because as being in my, crossing this thin line of being a writer, if you're with an editor who you feel doesn't understand what you're doing, you are alone.
That's true.
And my editor was somebody I loved and who I had a long relationship with, but didn't necessarily understand exactly what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And so so I mean, it's a legitimate fear, I think.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, and then what you have to do, which I would say to everybody in this audience, under any and all circumstances anyway, is trust your instinct. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
So let me ask you, really, what drew you to the vampire world, the world of the outsider?
I have never had a good answer to that. It was a whim. I thought, what would it be like to interview a vampire? What could he tell you? And I had no idea that I was opening this door to my own reality, that by going through a fantasy figure and almost a comic book figure, a black cloak wearing vampire with fangs and bleached bone-like skin, that I would suddenly be able to write about all the things that mattered to me. When I look back on it, I realized I was very influenced by a movie I saw when I was a child, 1934, black and white movie with Gloria Holden.
Wait a minute, let me just interrupt, because my next question is...
Okay.
And we had not planned this.
No.
Totally improvised. Talk about the influence of the 1936 Universal picture, Dracula's Daughter, which starred Otto Kruger and Gloria Holden. And I want to add that Hedda Hopper was in that movie. And it was from an idea directed by David Selznick.
Okay. And it was 1936, not 1934.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I saw that when I was a little kid. I went to the neighborhood show, the Grenada Theater. In those days, the 1940s, early 50s, there were neighborhood theaters everywhere where you could go for 12 cents and see movies any night of the week. There was no television yet. And I saw this wonderful movie, and it was old and creaky at the time, or so it seemed. And it was very atmospheric. It was set in London. There was a great deal of fog. Dracula's daughter was the Countess Zaleska, and she was a tortured soul a painter, and she was cursed with this need to drink blood and take life. And the movie contained one seductive scene after another, but I remembered one in particular. She sent her handler or finder or whatever he was out to find a victim, and the victim was this young woman who was on London Bridge, and she was about to take her own life. And he lured her to the studio of Countess Zaleska to pose for her, the Countess being a painter. And the Countess then mesmerized and entranced this young woman and victimized her and drained her of blood. But it was all done in this extremely glamorous and extremely erotic way. And of course, you never saw fangs and you never saw blood. You just knew that this unclean act of drinking blood had happened off camera. And the next thing, the young woman was in a terminal, wide-eyed coma, and she was in the hospital, and nobody knew what had happened to her. But I never forgot the torment of the Countess. I never forgot how elegant she was, how exalted her life seemed. And many, many years later, sitting at the typewriter thinking, well, let me give this a try. Let me try to interview a vampire. I think it was the feeling of that movie and the glamour, the dark glamour of that movie that strongly influenced me. And I actually rewrote that short story a couple, maybe 3 times over the years, and it was the last time I took it out that it developed into the novel.
Well, you know, a couple of things are interesting about that. We'll get to them later, but just in terms of responding to what you're saying, because it's very unusual, first of all, that the woman in that picture is a painter.
Yes.
Totally unusual. And second of all, that it's really it is a sexual act, or you've made it a sexual act, but that it was a woman who was doing it. Now, of course, the easy thing to say is that it was, David Selznick writing about it. He had the idea and sort of having a response to his mother, perhaps. But putting that aside, it is, and it does fit in with your attitudes, your thoughts about gender. I mean, did you think you picked up on any of that it was a woman who was doing this?
I think I just remember being spellbound. It was very erotic. The young girl who was being painted, the Countess asked her to lower her blouse, move it down so that her neck and her shoulders were bare. And then the Countess started moving toward her with this ring that she was using to hypnotize her. And the girl began to be afraid and said, I think I want to go home now. And of course, then it faded out and she was toast, And but it was beautiful to me. It was beautiful. You're getting to something, I don't even know if we can get into this or go anywhere with it, but eroticism isn't really just about eroticism. It's about something much, much deeper than, we keep looking for the deep erotic core of all kinds of things that aren't erotic, but eroticism has a deep core that's somewhere else psychologically, and I still can't find where it is. But it certainly made an impression on me as a kid. I didn't even think about the fact that they were the same gender. It never occurred to me. I mean, I didn't register it. And then, of course, I wrote a book without any consciousness of the gender of anybody. Right.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. That's what's so interesting about that. So you say that the vampires are metaphors for outsiders, the lost, the wanderers in the darkness who remembered the warmth of God's light but couldn't find it. And what do you feel about the underpinnings of this round of vampires? Books about, good and evil, salvation, damnation, and grace.
What do I feel about?
Well, I mean, when you wrote Interview with the Vampire, you were in a state, it was a different sense. You were not with the church. You had renounced the church.
No, I was an atheist, actually, yeah. I was grieving for a lost faith. I really was. And I think it was easy to write from the point of view of Louie, who was so miserable in the book and felt like such an outcast and such a monster. He was despairing and trying to kill himself, basically, when Lestat happens on him and makes him a vampire. And then he never gets with the program. I mean, he never really can understand the kind of freedom he possesses, or the power he possesses. You can never make it work for him. And the book stays a dark book all the way through. There's a brief period where Lestat and Louie have Claudia the child vampire with them, and they have actually 60 years of almost like happiness. But then it comes to an end when Claudia begins to ask questions.
Right.
Which of you made me? Why am I in this child body that is never going to grow up? What's happening? And Lestat's complete failure to provide any answers results in disaster.
But now you may not be with the church, but you have your own connection to God.
Well, I do. I'm a believer outside of religion. And I spent 12 years trying to be a member of Christianity, 12 years trying to be a Catholic again, and it was very interesting and intense 12 years, and basically I failed at it. I could not sustain my faith, or my faith wasn't sustained. I broke with the church finally over theological issues. And it was a very interesting experience to go 12 years of reading the Bible, studying theology, reading church history, reading the whole history of the Christian belief system and trying to understand what it was all about, and then coming to realize at the end that I didn't believe it. I didn't believe the system itself. And I have a great affection for the Catholic Church. You know, I grew up in it, and I'm culturally a Catholic, the way people sometimes are culturally Jews or Italians.
That's me. I'm a cultural Jew.
Yeah, and I'm a cultural Catholic still. This is the mother tongue with which I speak about life, is the Catholic language. But I had to leave it, and I do have great belief in God and great faith, but I also live with just complete cosmic uncertainty, and I think, frankly, that's the human condition.
But I think what I'm asking you in relation to this question is that you're writing about vampires now, but you are a believer. So there's a difference. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean,
I'm a believer, but I don't know any answers. You know, I don't know what happens after death. I'm a believer, but believing something, it's almost like, for me, it's more like hope than faith. You know, it's really, the only thing that gives me any kind of very specific consolation are the near-death experiences that people have, the literature that we're accumulating around those experiences. Those people that claim to have been, and often are, clinically dead and then resuscitated and come back, they talk about seeing an afterlife that is very interesting and very believable to me. But I don't know if any of it's true. I mean, I think we live with that. We don't know. We don't know that we'll ever see anybody that we've lost again. We don't know that anything will happen after we die. It may be the end. And maybe I don't really have faith in God. I don't know.
Well, I think, at least for me, that the older I get, the more I'm grateful to say I don't know anything.
You're grateful to say what?
I don't know anything.
I don't know anything, exactly. I don't know anything. I don't know anything. That's what Scrooge says when he wakes up from having been visited by the three ghosts, and there's that great scene in the Christmas Carol with Alistair Sim where he dances around the bedroom saying, I don't know anything, I don't know anything.
Right, there is a certain freedom in that. You're relieved of certain burdens, like many. So talk a little bit about comparing the writing of the vampire Lestat to the writing of Prince Lestat.
Well, once again, with Prince Lestat, I just did some new things that I wanted to do. I wrote it in a new way. Nobody yet, apparently, in writing the reviews, has noticed that it's not really a book that he himself is writing. All the other books were pretty much books that have him as the hero, or books he claims to be the author of, that he's giving to the vampire public and to the world as fiction. But nobody says that in Prince Lestat. The story just starts off. I'm the author of it. And one of the things I loved about writing it was working with a whole variety of different characters and seeing him through the eyes of those different characters. Some new characters, some old ones, some resurrected characters. And I think it's as different in form from all the other books as any of the other books might be different in form. The Vampire Chronicles really isn't an organized series. It never was. It was never a planned series. Right. I think it's what's called a roman fleuve. It's a series of books that make up one long book with a bunch of shared characters.
It's worked. So let me ask you this. What about Great Expectations stayed with you, and how did it differ from the American books that you were reading at the time?
Well, I read Great Expectations when I was 14, and it was in our freshman textbook in high school. And I fell in love with Dickens and fell in love with Pip, the hero of Great Expectations. And I actually ended up loving Pip more than Dickens did, obviously. You know, I was shocked later when I found out that Dickens really didn't think Pip deserved the success he dreamed of, because I identified with Pip, this little boy in the blacksmith shop who wanted so much to be a gentleman and to live in a kind of glamorous world that he saw at Miss Havisham's house when he met Estella and fell in love with Estella. So I go back and read that book at least once every 2 years. And it's the book that made me want to be a writer, and the book that, I don't know, pointed a way to be a writer. I've written some of my most intense books in the first person. It's in the first person from Pip standpoint, and I go back to it again and again to see how Dickens handles problems of the first person. It's just rock bottom foundational to my life, but so is Jane Eyre, which I read at the same time. Mm-hmm. I was reading Jane Eyre in the library in high school while we read Great Expectations in class, and I was really blown away by Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. And there again, that was the world I wanted to be in as a writer.
Talk a little bit about that.
Oh, it's a world of intense passion, feeling the very best of the romantic tradition. Mm-hmm. The person of sensibility who believes in his or her own emotions and a sensuous world and the world that he or she perceives, you know. I mean, I didn't understand any of that as a kid. I didn't know what romanticism was or anything like that. But
it made you feel passionately.
It totally made me feel that way. And I love the language, too. I love language. I love words. And I just sank into those English voices from the 19th century. I don't remember reading anything else at the time that was American. I wasn't a well-read kid, you know, a very slow reader, but that language was worth every bit of effort it took to understand it. I don't know how often I had to look up words, not too often really, but whatever was involved, it was natural to me, that language. I loved it. And I certainly walked out of that year, that freshman year at Redemptorist High School, wanting to be a writer because of those two books.
You know, I think that, I mean, it's great that you read that, but what's amazing is that you were able to translate that into your own writing. I mean, having a vision doesn't necessarily mean one can translate that. Mm-hmm. But when I read Interview with a Vampire for the first time when I was 23, and I just had such a major experience with that book and with all of your writing, and that's to me what makes a great storyteller, when you have an experience when you're reading a book, that something happens to you. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens in those books, and that's what you're able to do. You
enter a whole world in those two books. The character draws you into the world.
But you have a physical reaction, practically.
Yeah, just about physical. Wanted to stay in the book forever, engulfed. Mm-hmm.
So the issue of gender, it's a sort of recessive element in your books by virtue of your narrators. But what do you think about this and how it plays out in your writing?
Well, I don't have any comfortable sense of being any gender. I never have. And I spent a pretty uncomfortable adolescence, really, because of that. Because I didn't really fit. I was an outcast, and I wasn't stereotypically feminine. And this was the 50s, when a lot of pressure, I think pressure is put on adolescents in every age to conform to the standards of their culture. But in the 50s, there was a lot of pressure on a Southern girl in particular to really be a girl. And I grew up in a family with 4 girls and a mother and a grandmother, and I didn't even know my father till he came home from the war when I was about 4 years old. That was the first time I ever saw him. Mm-hmm. And in our world, there was no gender. There was no gender distinctions. My mother believed that we should do anything we wanted when we grew up, that we could be writers, we could be artists, we could achieve anything. She read us poetry actually to teach us rhythm, to give us a sense of the rhythm of language. And she was very optimistic and filled with faith, and there just wasn't anybody around saying, like, iron your brother's shirt or anything. I mean, that just wasn't happening. And when I got to be about 14, I was really rudely shocked by discovering the whole gender issue. I was frightened of the whole thing. I was really, and at the same time, I wanted desperately to go out with boys and to be accepted. Go buy mascara for 12 cents at Woolworths and like that. And, I was a very passionate person, disconcertingly passionate, I would say. And that was confusing to me because there is a wide range, apparently, of passion in women. And you can have very good friends who know nothing about erotic passion at all and other friends who know all about it. And anyway, it goes right into my work. I'm very confused about it. I wouldn't say confused because that makes me sound lost. I just don't care about gender. It's just not what's important about a character.
So you mentioned that, well, it is sort of, I don't know if this fits in, but it does in a way. You mentioned that Lestat is sort of your male self, that he does things that you wish you could do, but that you can't. And so what my question is, well, what can't you do besides the physical constraints of being a mere mortal?
Well, first of all, what can't I do?
Yeah,
well,
you can do everything.
No, I can't do everything. I can't do everything. See, when I was a kid, I did. I walked around on dark and dangerous streets because I was afraid of nothing when I was 12. And I walked through dangerous neighborhoods, and I went exploring on my own and went places I wasn't supposed to go, and I was never afraid and nothing bad ever happened to me. But when I grew older, I realized the world was a dangerous place for a woman.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, this is a big factor. Lestat's a man. I mean, he can before he ever became a vampire, he could handle people who messed with him. He could rearrange their face, as the expression goes. I don't think I ever got over the shock of realizing that I wasn't going to develop into an adult who was on an equal basis with every other adult.
Talk about the ceremonies of the church and how they affected your writing.
Well, I grew up in the old-fashioned Catholic Church before Vatican II, and I went to Mass and Communion every morning. And the Mass was in Latin, and High Mass was a beautiful spectacle with beautiful music and chanting and incense. And the churches I went to as a child were huge churches built by the immigrant population of New Orleans, and they were filled with flickering candles. As people have applied cliches to it, smells and bells, which I think is not very nice. But it was a beautiful atmosphere in which to come into contact every day of your life with the divine. And that's what is so great about Catholic ritual. It really is. It's worked for 2,000 years to invite people to leave their cares at the door of the church and just come into God's house and try to open yourself up to a wordless awareness of God's presence. And these ceremonies really have quite a power. And I think when you first leave the church, you may not realize that, but you miss this very much. The only place in my life I've ever had a sense of the sacred in the same way I have it in a Catholic cathedral or church is in a redwood forest like Muir Woods. Standing there, I've had that same sense, just almost awestruck.
You mean a majesty?
The majesty, those soaring redwoods, the sunlight coming down in beams, the quiet, the vastness of the forest, that sense of the forest being alive around you. And that to me is very much like being in Notre Dame de Paris or St. Louis Cathedral or my parish church, St. Alphonsus, But those ceremonies left their imprint on me, and everything I write has been influenced by them, No
Absolutely.
question.
I mean, I think that the richness of your writing is affected by those ceremonies.
Yeah.
And tradition. So talk a little bit about, some of the writers who've been important to you, Nabokov, Hemingway, Poe, Carson McCullers.
Right. I don't read very fast, and there are many writers I've never read and will never get to. But I really loved Hemingway and read every bit of fiction Hemingway ever wrote. And Carson McCullers was another writer who had a profound effect on me. Just 3 novels, really, that she wrote. that I loved. The Member of the Wedding, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, and what's the third novel that she wrote? I'm blanking out on it, but I love her work very, very much. Her short stories, The Ballad of the Sad Cafe. I thought she was an absolutely wonderful writer. And these writers don't have a lot in common that I loved. I mean, I love Virginia Woolf, too. And Shakespeare. I went nuts over Shakespeare when I was finally able to read Shakespeare. I had to do a lot of work to get into him. And when I did that work, which was really just reading every single footnote in an annotated version of a play, to where I understood the lingo, the jokes, you know, all the different expressions, the idioms. But once it opened up to me, then it was just unbelievable to have all of Shakespeare to read and just sink into. And I'm still, you know, enjoying Shakespeare all the time like that, really.
You know, I'm publishing a book by a woman named Tina Packer, who started a Shakespeare acting company, Shakespeare and Company, in the Berkshires. And she's done this amazing book that's about the women in Shakespeare and how they reflect his sort of evolution as a human being.
I want to read it.
I'm going to send it to you.
Okay.
All right, so let me just see. I think we're down to the last question. So when you wrote the vampire books, did you feel as if you were going sort of beyond the beyond in storytelling, in eroticism, in the religious layers of life, in symbolism and feeling? I mean, I know you were just writing and following your instinct, but when you reread that book, or those books, you just reread those books to write Prince Lestat. Did you have?
Yeah, they have for me a delicious madness to them. I really don't think they're like anything else.
No, they're not.
And I'm very glad that that's true. I believe if they have any value, that value resides in their uniqueness, the fact that they are outrageously unlike anything else. And I kind of love it that it worked out that I didn't have to suppress my madness and my weirdness as many writers have had to do in the past. Right. Especially gay writers. Not that I'm necessarily a gay writer. I have no idea whether I am or not, but I know gay writers have had to suppress, you know, like Forrester, for example. You know, they really had to hold it down. They couldn't really write about what was going on emotionally with themselves. But I've been able in those books to pour out all the weirdness, and you've been very much part of that, because you've never asked me, you've never said, can't you put a straight character or two in this novel, or can't you balance this out, or couldn't Louie have a girlfriend as well as Lestat, or, you know, such things never come up between us. And so I've had this really wonderful experience of just writing completely from my heart. Whatever I'm doing because I want to do it, you know, and it's a great feeling.
Well, I want to say, before I open this up, that you are a great storyteller. And you're seeing this sort of very diminutive person here, but don't be fooled, because Anne Anne's the pageantry and drama of that Anne writes about is in her life, not the drama, but the size and the vision. And St. Elizabeth is a perfect example of that, and the way in which you do things. I've always been sort of awestruck by the pageantry of it, and you always bring it off. And I want to say about Anne's writing, she never disappoints.
Thank you, Vicki.
So now we're going to open it up, and if you raise your hand, I will call on you. Please wait before you ask the question, because there are people with microphones who want to hear what you have to say. Finally, a brave person in the yellow scarf. Do you want to stand up?
So lovely to hear you speak. I'm always struck when I read you, that you seem to be such an observer of relationships, and that comes through in your stories so much. Do you consider yourself that person?
Well, I think the relationships are the heart of the book for me. The relationships between the people, the love that that my characters have for one another. This is right at the core of it. I can tell you that one of the jarring things I've experienced is to see my work translated into script form by people in Hollywood who do not seem to realize that these characters love one another, and often go for the story and play down the relationship and make these characters very brittle and cold and sarcastic and nasty to each other. And I would read these scripts and just think, how in God's name could anybody read my work and not see that Lestat loves Louie, Louie loves Lestat, that Marius loves Lestat, that all of these characters are deeply involved. And it's yeah, I would say the relationship and the love, in a way, it's all about that. It's all about it. Thank you for the question. That was a good question.
And the red in the back with a book? Thank you.
Okay. Last year I reread all the Vampire Chronicles before knowing Prince Lestat was coming out. And I noticed your first question referring to how Lestat was kind of secondary in Interview with the Vampire. Mm-hmm. In reading The Vampire Lestat and getting to know Lestat through that book, I thought back to Interview with the Vampire and wondered, was Louis lying about Lestat, the way he treated him? Lestat seemed so cold-hearted, and Louis was almost a puppet and a plaything to him. Mm-hmm. And then in Vampire Lestat, you see the deeper, emotional, sensitive side of Lestat, so to speak. So I got the feeling maybe Louis, one of them was lying after rereading both of those books.
Well, no, I don't think at all that Louis was lying. I think that he loved Lestat deeply, and as the books reveal, as the series goes on, he loves him very much. But he's deeply resentful of Lestat's power, and that Louis is a person who wants somebody to be God for him and somebody else to be the devil for him. And he's actually searching for a place in a religious cosmology that doesn't exist. And he is angry at Lestat for not giving him reasons to live, for being a miracle without a revelation. And he's not lying. It's just his extreme point of view. He's presenting everything through the lens of his resentment and his anger. And that's very much who I was when I wrote the book. And the person that I resented was my husband, Stan, and Lestat was based on him. And Stan was the strong one, the atheist, and the one who could live from day to day without a cosmology and didn't seem to have any need for one, and really thought life itself was sacramental and wonderful. And a lot of what that book is about, of my dialogues with Stan. And as I changed, as I evolved, as I went on with the Chronicles, I tried to make it, I didn't try to make it clear, but it emerged that Louis really deeply, deeply loves Lestat, and Lestat loves Louis. And there is a part in the novel where Louis is sitting on a staircase in the Theater of the Vampires, and he said, I realized I hated Lestat for all the wrong reasons. I was really wrong in the way I resented him. It's just one paragraph, but to me it was a very important part of the book.
Yes, in the orange.
Hi. Well, it's been a long time since I've read the Chronicles, and it's been a longer time since I've seen the movie. Though I have to say, if I hadn't seen the movie Interview with the Vampire, I probably wouldn't have read the book. Mm-hmm. But I thought Brad Pitt, first of all, as first time I saw him, I became interested. Who is this young man who is playing Louis? And I thought, Tom Cruise, I wouldn't have recognized him as Tom Cruise. Mm-hmm. And since then, they have formed what I imagine Lestat and Louis to look like. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I picked up too. I mean, of course, then you read the book, you want to know more, and I picked up. Sure. They love each other. Mm-hmm. So, job well done. I still want to get to New Orleans one of these days.
Well, I think they did do an excellent job in the movie of capturing the characters. They really did. That movie was extraordinary. I mean, I now know 20 years later how extraordinary it was that a movie that faithful to a book would get made. And it was David Geffen. That was the genius behind it. The mega producer, David Geffen, he really wanted that movie to be faithful to the novel. And he hired the very best people he could on every level to do it, from the director, Neil Jordan, to the person who did the music, the makeup, the costumes, and so forth. And it was called at the time one of the most expensive cult movies ever made. And I understand why people said that, because it was so very faithful and uncompromising with the material. And I noticed when I came out earlier this year with my little announcement that Prince Lestat was going to appear, that when the story went all over the world, which amazed me and amazed a lot of people, it was Brad and Tom in every photograph, you know. Whether it was Sri Lanka or Tokyo or Paris or London, it was Brad and Tom. And there they were in all their beautiful, you know, with their beautiful hair and their satin and so forth. And I thought, you know, Tom and Brad really did put these characters on the international map. And I think a lot of people had the experience that you did. They didn't know anything about the books until they saw that film. And a lot of kids saw that film, and they became readers of the books, very, very young. 10, 11, 12 years old. So it really was quite an incredible experience. And it's frightening me a little bit that Universal today is talking about maybe remaking that film. I'm not sure that's a good, yeah, thank you. I'm going to tell them that you reacted in this way. But I'm not sure that that's their plan. I just heard they've bought all the books. I insisted they buy everything. We've been in negotiations, the producers and me, for 6 years, I think. But Universal has finally come in, and it's all going to happen. But I don't think that film should be remade. I think it's damn near perfect. It's not entirely perfect. Claudia is too old. Claudia's really younger in the book, but Kirsten Dunst does a fabulous job of capture. Again, every time, everyone is dead on about the character. Even when they take somebody like Antonio Banderas, who looks nothing like Armand, he still gets the character. That was Armand's character. You know, and when he and Louie kissed, that to me was an archetypal moment. I was very grateful for the whole thing. You know, I saw the movie on the big screen in New Orleans, and I went to pieces. I remember crying in your arms, just not being able to stay there. And we came out, and when I went home, I just remember sobbing. It took me all the way back, not just to the writing of the book, but took me beyond that to the experiences that had inspired the book. So.
Okay, the man in the back. You. Yes. Microphone is coming. Great.
Thank you. First off, no love for Queen of the Damned, the movie, and rightfully so. But how does it feel to actually have influenced so many authors, filmmakers, with just the culture and your archetype of the vampire, such as like Vampire the Masquerade, even some such as even Twilight or anything? Everything is based off your idea going against the 1930s movies of a monster with a soul, really, which the Universal monsters kind of portrayed. How does it feel to influence everybody?
Well, I don't know that I have really done that. I'm very gratified that people think my work has been influential, but you know, if you go back to those black and white movies, if you go back to Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman, you get right there the suffering, tormented immortal who can barely stand the curse that he's enduring. And I'll tell you something else, that I didn't read the original Mary Shelley until about 1995, I guess, or 94. And I was amazed that in that novel, the monster talks in the first person and tells his whole agonized story. And I thought, my gosh, nobody ever told me this was in the book. I mean, how can anybody give me credit for bringing that element into this when Mary Shelley did it completely in the early 1800s? I mean, so I don't know. If people credit me with having an influence, I'm happy with that and I'm grateful for it. But I think the concept of vampires is so rich that it's not surprising that authors would come along like Stephanie Meyer and Charlaine Harris and Laurel K. Hamilton, and they would unpack it in new and really interesting ways. I'm very thrilled to see that happen and to see that This is a different world for writers today. They can do anything in the supernatural realm. And not that I didn't do what I wanted. I did exactly what I wanted, but it was an uphill fight. With Interview with the Vampire, it was an uphill fight because nobody else was writing anything like that at the time. And now fantasy and paranormal romance and supernatural fiction are mainstream. And young writers coming up with extremely weird ideas and new ideas are not going to be, they're not going to be fighting quite the battle that many authors fought in the 60s and 70s.
Yes. Thank you. This is not anything that I'd ever thought of before, but something that you said tonight sparked this idea. Because the vampire experience is so erotic, does that have anything to do with the core that now that Mikari holds within her? Is that like an unfettered eroticism in the core?
I haven't ever thought of it in that way. I thought that the drinking of blood, the blood exchange, was the erotic act, and that my vampires, as you know, they don't have conventional sex at all, and they don't have any desire for it, and they don't miss it. It's really strictly a matter of wanting to merge with the victim, and they merge in their mind, and they merge physically. This is making me think of the mind meld in Star Trek. I'm not sure. I'm looking at my assistant who's a Trekkie. But anyway, but no, I mean, to me, that is what it's all about. And I think everybody's always known that, and that's why they didn't show anybody biting anybody's neck in any early film. I remember my mother telling me that about the original Dracula film. You're not going to see, you never see the bite. You never see it. Like she was speaking in a whisper of something that was too powerful to show. But no, I didn't think of the core necessarily as being erotic in itself. Interesting.
Woman in the gray? Yes, you.
That lady in pink has been holding up her hand.
Okay, you're next.
Hi,
Lady
yes.
in pink.
I just wanted to say I'm just in awe of your abilities. I find that your books are a celebration of beauty and humanity, and just every level, from the personalities of the individual to the personality of the world you've created, is astounding.
Thank you.
My one question, well, I have many questions, but the one question I'm going to ask is, in the point of views...
Can you speak up just a little bit?
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, in the point of views of the way you've written, for example, the interview, or how David writes of the characters, the exchange, did you ever find that restricting, the actual point of views not being able to express, for example... the one lady mentioned Lestat in the second book and his point of view versus Louie, and how it's actually their point of view, so it's not really a lie. You're getting a different perception. Did you find that restricting when you were writing the individual novel at hand?
Well, I don't find it restrictive, but I know what you mean. I mean, with every novel, I have to get into it and find a way to tell the story that's obsessing me. And to reveal the personality of the character that's obsessing me. And it always takes a lot of work to like push it down into one voice and let that voice start talking. But that's the nature of the endeavor. It's not, I don't find it restrictive. And I enjoy that. I enjoy that pressure. I not only enjoy it, but I mean, it works for me. It's the way that I'm able to move into my world and discover everything that I need to discover. I do like to work with multiple point of view very much. And I like to do books where we get other people's points of view, first person sometimes, third person sometimes. It's totally different to me to write a novel like The Witching Hour, where you're dealing with third person voice. It's completely different from having Lestat simply come swaggering in and start talking. It feels different, but it's a matter of the appropriate thing at the appropriate time to tell the kind of story. And I frankly love it. Really, I love the challenge of it.
Okay, the woman in pink.
Yes.
was very excited to come here tonight, and I booked this as soon as I saw it in the paper. So I've read most of your books, but one thing that I could never understand, where do you get your ideas from? I mean, do you zone out? Do you just get into another dimension? I mean, because some of them, I can't think of the name of the book offhand, but I just was like, I can't read this. I mean, it's like so far out, and yet there was something so compelling that I couldn't put the book down.
Yeah. Well, I don't know where they come from. I mean, that's the whole truth. It's like my mind is bubbling over with these ideas and images. They come to me as I'm falling asleep. They come to me when I'm watching television. It's like having a chemical in the brain. I think I'm just a few steps away from being insane. No, I think that's really true, that, you know, I have a lot in common with somebody who's completely psychotic, because I'm just this side of it where I can function. And a little bit more of that chemical, and maybe I wouldn't be able to function, or I wouldn't be able to get all the personalities to cooperate, you know. But I don't know. I've been asked that many times. I have no idea. And you know, I feel that about other writers I'm reading, you know, I'll read another writer and I'll think, where the hell did he ever think of this kind of stuff? My God. You know, because it's not what comes to me. But I think writers, one of the big things we have to do is be receptive. You know, we don't really choose to be supernatural writers as opposed to realism writers. We respond to what is intense for us and what really enables us to open up and be our best selves.
I think it's about trusting those voices that come up in you.
Exactly, trusting.
Okay, the man, are you a man in the back? Okay, it's hard to tell.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I am a man. I'm sorry.
I recognize the form now. It was only when you were sitting down.
I'd like to start off by applauding you, ma'am, because I go all over the world, and I'm addicted to Q&As and events of this caliber, and I'm so proud of Philadelphia's library. I cut my trip. I was in L.A., and I saw my friend who was part of the staff here. I told him a couple months ago, I said, hey, I got to come and see Anne Rice. She's a legend, and he knows I've been tracking legends down for over 50 years. In fact, London just wrote about me in April. It reached about 50 million people around the world and said that I might have the best photo collection on the planet. And I live right here in Philadelphia. And to achieve that is a unique accomplishment. Mm-hmm. But I say that in celebration that it took someone of her caliber. Anne Rice, you're an inspiration. You're a trailblazer. You're before your time. You're a trendsetter. With all the movies that copying your type of formula, they need to take a text and lesson from you. Once again, I'd like to applaud you, Miss Wilson, because I thought you were excellent. Your line of questions were right on point. They're entertaining, they're informative, and obviously you know Miss Rice very well, because you know how to get to her and get the right questions out of her. My question to you, Miss
I'll pay you the $5 after.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Rice, as I said to you earlier, I did cut my trip from L.A. I came in today because I knew you were going to be here. I was upstairs and I saw that it was an announcement that said that there's something about no photos. I have over 5,000 famous people. Among those people are Alex Haley, Tennessee Williams, Arthur Miller, and not to have you in my collection would be a tremendous loss. So I'm hoping that if you can squeeze me in before you leave the city.
Okay.
Oh, great. Okay, my friend. Okay. Then let me take a rest. And once again, thank you and the Free Library of Philadelphia for having such a great ensemble of great guests.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, this woman with the short hair. I know you're a woman.
Hi, Anne. It is a real honor to actually talk to you.
Can you talk up?
Yes.
Thank you.
And I can stand up too. My mom turned me on to your books when I was in my 20s. The first book I read of yours was The Witching Hour, and I was done after that. I mean, I couldn't stop reading. I turned my own child onto reading your books also.
I'm
question,
sorry, I can't.
I said I turned my own son onto your
great.
books also,
I'm
so
honored.
it's been
Yeah.
handed down. My question is, first I'll make a statement. I mourned when you made the announcement that you weren't writing the Vampire Chronicles anymore. Why did you make the decision to begin again?
Why did I make the decision to come back?
What made you start writing the Vampire
Well,
Chronicles?
I missed Lestat. I really completely missed him. I missed the intensity of writing from his point of view. He was still alive for me. And at the time that I made the statement, I shouldn't have made it. I shouldn't have said I was never going to write about him again. I was in a period of grief and personal misery. I just lost my husband. And my life had changed in a very, very dramatic way that was almost too big for me to comprehend. I'd spent 41 years married and been just about every night of my life with that person, that one person, and now that person was gone. And I associated Lestat with grief and pain and sadness, and I thought I was turning away from him forever because I couldn't see any more stories with him at that point. And then the years passed, and I realized I wanted him to come back, and all kinds of fragments and ideas were coming to me. And so I went back and started reading the books over again, and I was with him again right away. And if anything, it was like once he came through again, he would not stop talking, and it's been a great experience. But that's basically it. I should have known that, sometimes one needs these breaks. I mean, between the first novel, Interview with the Vampire, and The Vampire Lestat, it was 8 or 9 years. So really, that I should have anticipated there might be another break like that. I was premature in making that announcement.
And it's a process. It's all a process. Okay, we have time for one more question. So who has a burning desire? Okay, in the blue, waving your hand. Are you a third sex? No, I'm joking.
No.
Thank you. I've been reading your book since I was 11 years old. I'm 30 now. I started writing because of you, so thank you so much for being my inspiration.
Great.
Since you've become a big success, when you first started writing from now, how does that make you feel since it blew up so big and caught on so fast to pretty much all over the globe?
How does it make me feel?
Yes.
Well, the only thing I ever wanted in my whole life was to be a writer. And I wanted to be read, and the dream came true. And that was the most important aspect of the whole thing, that people would read my work. That's what it means to be successful as a writer. It means people are going to read your books. They're going to open them and actually read the words that you wrote. I think the worst thing that can happen to a writer is not to be despised or criticized. It's to be ignored, for people to be completely indifferent. You put your heart in a book, you pour everything that you have into that book, and then people just don't read it, they don't know about it, they don't hear about it, they don't care about it, goes out of print. That's what most writers face, and that's what I was terrified of when I started out. I was terrified that would happen to me, but it didn't. And my books have been read, and I'm just profoundly grateful that has happened, profoundly grateful. It's a reality that I live with, and I live with the gratitude. Now, there are a million aspects to that, bad aspects, good aspects, but basically that one thing is so important and so foundational to my life that I have only gratitude for it.
So you've been a fabulous audience, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank the Philadelphia Free Library. And hasn't Anne been great? Let's give her a hand.
Thank you guys. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.